The Hofburg Palace in Vienna may not scream modernity to you since it's the home of the Habsburg dynasty for centuries. But even this testament to conservatism and tradition can teach us a lesson or two about change management. It hosts every year concerts, conferences and congresses, and doubles up as an event centre overall, including this, the Peter Drucker Forum, the annual gathering for business management. Inside, I spoke to the philanthropist and angel investor and board member, Mary Meany Haynes, about her recipe for successful change management.
The odds are pretty sobering. So on average, the vast majority of change programs fail. They do not deliver the objectives they set out to. They don't substantially and sustainably improve the performance and the health of the company. So the odds are stacked against you. And if you look at the academic literature, if you look at all the surveys that we had done, something like 70% of major change programs fail. The interesting thing is that if you look at why they fail, in the overwhelming majority of cases, it's because of humans. It's because the senior leadership isn't absolutely aligned around it. I remember working for one company where we had been asked by the CEO to work with the senior leadership team and make sure that everybody was aligned around the strategy and we had everything in place. And so we interviewed all the members of the senior leadership team, and what came through those interviews was actually they were all in very different places about where they should take the company. So we played this back to the CEO, who refused to believe it. He says, no, that's ridiculous. I've told them what the strategy is. They understand it. I've mentioned it. We've talked about it. I've told them the strategy
That's okay, then.
many times. They clearly get it. And so we pushed back and said, no, we've spoken to everyone and they clearly do not get it. They're all in different places. So it's not surprising that you see confusion and chaos in your organization because they're giving out mixed messages about what the strategy is and how to get there. Anyway, the CEO refused to believe it. So of course we had a top team meeting. We gave everybody the anonymous voting machines. And the first question we put on screen was, we have a clear and compelling strategy for our organization. And we had them vote. 100% of the people in the room voted yes. The CEO was delighted. The second question we put on the screen was, our strategy is. And then we wrote 6 completely different, totally irreconcilable descriptions of where they should take the company going forward. Again, everybody voted. This time there was 2 votes against each of the 6 propositions, at which point the CEO exploded, so he had to leave the room. We had to calm him down. But actually, that was the only thing that finally came through that, they weren't in the same place. They were not aligned about where they should take the company and how they were going to win and where they should play and so on. So that was essential. So sometimes it's the senior leadership that isn't on board. Sometimes it's the middle management that is blocking the change. And sometimes it's the employees that just don't understand why they should change, what they need to do differently. So getting all of those human components right is critically important and often underestimated. So first thing I would say is this is tough. But the good news is that there's lots of examples of what you have to do. There isn't a silver bullet, but there are lots of things that you have to do with passion and persistence over time, and that's why it makes it hard.
And does technology, which is another layer now of change, does that make change generally easier? Does it facilitate change, or is it a sort of alien concept to an awful lot of people? They're not familiar with the jargon, with the technicalities of the technology.
Yeah.
Does that complicate it?
So it's interesting because when we looked at digital transformations, what we found is on average, digital transformations have an even lower success rate than other kinds of business transformations. And part of the reason for that is because often they're technical skills that leaders need to have, people at all levels need to have that don't exist. Part of that is you do sometimes get resistance and blockages. So in some ways, I think technology can be both a huge enabler and a huge opportunity, but it can also be a huge blocker and a challenge, especially for large and complex organizations. So the other thing that we found in our surveys was that smaller organizations tend to be more successful. The larger, the more global, the more complex, the harder it was to actually drive a major transformation through.
This is like shifting a tanker and changing
Absolutely.
direction.
Yeah.
So how do you get from it being a sort of facilitator then? How do you get towards the technology being helpful? What's the key thing to do to make the leadership understand the technology? Or
well, so I mean, in my view at least, the technology is a critical enabler. So part of what you need to do is first, be very clear about what is your vision for the change. Like, where are you trying to take the company, and why does this make sense? And ideally, something that doesn't just appeal to the mind, isn't just a logical, rational, but also really gets people emotionally and kind of appeals to their sense of purpose and meaning and motivation and so on. So again, there's lots of ways that technology can be used as you both develop that aspiration, but then also as you think about, okay, well, how do we really engage people? The second thing you have to do is assess, okay, well, where are we relative to our aspiration? Do we have the skills that we need? Do we have the capabilities that we need? You know, what needs to change from an operational or technological standpoint? And that requires humility to really hold the mirror up and look at yourself and say, okay, these are the strengths we have to build on, but these are the challenges we need to address. And with technology in particular, you need to really look hard at, do we actually have the skills? And that starts also with senior leaders, right? So if I think about some of the companies I worked with that made the biggest change, actually they had the senior leadership go through capability building programs and training and really learn some of the digital and technical skills.
They're not asking someone else to do something they can't do themselves.
Or at least they needed to have enough awareness so that they're asking the right questions. Like, and you see this with AI, right? So one of the major pharmaceutical companies that I worked with, they actually had a team that was working with advanced analytics, and they literally kind of doing some pretty cutting edge work. And the team came in to present to the CEO a very counterintuitive insight that had come from the advanced analytics. And it was really fascinating because, after they'd finished this presentation, there was kind of complete silence, and they were waiting to see what was going to happen. And it was interesting because in that minute when everybody was waiting with bated breath to see what the CEO, that's when the transformation ultimately succeeded, right? Because the CEO decided not to go with his gut instinct and his intuition. Actually, what he said when he started to speak about it was, my natural inclination would have been to do this, but actually you've convinced me that that's the wrong thing to do, and now we're going to do something different. And so that's when,
that galvanizes the change as well as
well, absolutely, right? Because I've never seen a transformation work where there's been a disconnect between what the CEO said and what they did.
How easy is it for a business leader to be genuinely humble rather than be seen as, I've got all the answers, I'm dynamic, and we're forging ahead with my vision?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important for senior leaders to have humility. If I think about the major catastrophic performance failures of many organizations that I saw very close, in almost every single instance, there was a CEO who had stopped listening and had stopped learning and who had started to believe his own PR. And I think there are lots of reasons why that happens, because I think the role itself often tends to reinforce hubris. Your jokes become funnier. The feedback that you get gets more and more sanitized. And so I think it's incredibly important for leaders, first of all, to be aware of that and to acknowledge that. But secondly, to take steps to make sure that they're getting the feedback, that they have people who will tell them the truth, that they're engaging with people across their organization, across lots of different levels, so that they really understand what's happening. I mean, I've certainly been in companies where everybody knew that if you came with an inconvenient truth or an uncomfortable fact and you had the courage to raise it, that was probably one of the last things you would do at that company. And in some cases there was a definite culture of fear, and I think that is hugely corrosive. So yes, absolutely. I think humility is incredibly important, but I also think it's hard.
Lots of businesses want to work through the strategic plan, have everything sorted before they start committing resources and money. But in a way, you could take the opposite lesson, which is just get on with it, just experiment and do it, and you'll learn and fail. And I'm trying to work out which one is the most efficient way for a business to turn.
Yeah, well, if you can do the homework and understand the answers to the question in advance,
of course, do that.
Yeah. You obviously want to do that, right? But if you're going into completely unknown, uncertain territory, then there is a role for experimentation and innovation and trying different things out and learning what works and what doesn't. Another criteria is that you want to have a hypothesis. You want to have a point of view that you can either test or disprove, right? Using very much the scientific method. So you want to have goals and objectives. You don't want to do an experiment at a huge scale with lots of risk and uncertainty if you can do it at a smaller scale.
Yeah. And
then of course the most important thing is, what do you learn from it? Like, how do you actually make sure that it is useful for your exploration and for the journey that you're trying to go on? So I think there's absolutely a role for intelligent failure. I think most businesses, frankly, don't fail smartly, and they don't fail enough. They often fail on stupid stuff where they do the same stupid mistake over and over and over again, or complex failures. But this is all about, how do you how do you learn enough? Because the world is changing really rapidly, and there's lots of things that are completely uncertain and unknown. So how do you create the right kinds of experiments that will help you learn and grow and develop? And I think most companies don't do that very well.